Hi, good morning, everybody in Australia. Thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning, your time. Good afternoon to Dr. Daneshmand and Rich Vaughan, it's afternoon in California, and it's evening here in London. So we've got a global webinar going on, which is great. As a lot of you know, San Diego Fertility Center do a lot of these webinars. We spend a lot of time educating and empowering people to be able to make decisions that are right for you. And the reason we're doing this is so we can get exactly that. So we've got Dr. Danishmand, who's going to be talking through some of the medical considerations that you need to think about. And then we also have Rich Vaughan, who will be talking about the US considerations, and then Stephen Page talking about the Australian stuff. So without further ado, I'm actually going to introduce the panelists. So Dr. Danishmand, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely, no, with pleasure. Thank you. It's lovely to be with you on this Saturday morning in Australia and this Friday afternoon in California. So I'm Dr. Daneshmand. I've been in practice for about 23 years. I did my training at University of California in Los Angeles, and really have had the honor of accompanying many intended parents in their journeys to building their families and growing their families. We've also done a great deal of research and many publications, continue to do so. The publications have really focused in on making the process of IVF safer and more successful. So we published papers on endometrial receptivity. How do we make the uterus more receptive so that when we transfer an embryo, there's a better chance of a healthy delivery? How do we select the strongest embryos based on their cell quality and structure, so that when we transfer an embryo, again, it has the best chance of a healthy delivery? Currently, I'm one of the principal investigators in a non-invasive chromosome testing study, non-invasive PGT or PGS, which means instead of performing a biopsy on the embryos, we're looking at the DNA that the embryo sheds into the culture media. So research is really important. I think that's one of the reasons why we've had such stellar success rates here. Really, it's a pleasure to answer your questions and concerns, especially during this sort of period of the pandemic, as intended parents continue to move on towards building their families.
Wonderful. Richard Vaughan, would you like to jump in and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'll try to keep it short, Saeed. You have so much to say. You know, it's always a pleasure listening to you, and thank you for including me on the panel, Richard. It's always great to speak with you and with Stephen as well. So I have been an attorney for 28 years now. Have been in this specific field for 16 years now. I'm a parent through surrogacy and egg donation as well. And my law firm is a national law firm, so we can handle assisted reproduction cases all throughout the US. I've also, during my time in this field, chaired the American Bar Association Assisted Reproduction Committee. So that's been a wonderful place to sort of meet lots of colleagues within the US and worldwide, and Stephen included. So I think that's enough about me for now, and I'll let the rest.
Wonderful. Well, great segue into Stephen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Richard. I'm a dad through surrogacy, and I've been admitted since 1987. In 1988, I had my first surrogacy case. And since then, I've advised in about 1,700 surrogacy journeys for clients in every part of Australia, and at last count, 31 countries overseas.
Well, there you go. Great panel of people, and it's wonderful. We've actually got 48 attendees, which is fantastic. So for everybody who's listening, if you have any questions, please write them on the control panel. You should have the ability to write a question. I will answer those or get the panelists to answer them either during or at the end of the webinar. We're going to start with Dr. Danishmann for about 10 minutes, then we're going to go to Rich and then to Stephen, and then there will be a Q&A session at the end. For those of you who don't know me, I work for the San Diego Fertility Center out of London, unless you couldn't tell by the accent. I am also a dad of 2 children born through surrogacy and IVF in the States. So I'm not a professional dad. So any questions you have on being a dad, send my way. Dr. D, do you want to talk to us? You mentioned it very early on in your little rant about COVID, because obviously that is the thing of the moment, right? This is a pandemic, it's been going for a year now. How has that impacted surrogacy from a viral perspective? Can you talk about the vaccine? Can you talk pre, during, post transfer? Can you extol or talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I can talk about that, but I can't do it all in 2 minutes. I just want to make sure, I want to forewarn you. So absolutely. You know, the pandemic in a way has sort of spurred innovation, spurred collaboration. And also I feel that there's this sort of a desire for intended parents, even a greater desire for them to have their families, to grow their families, to build their families. Especially during sort of these times of on and off lockdowns and a great deal of suffering. So what we have done is, because of our involvement in research and the studies that we perform, many of these studies are global, so we've really been able to reach out to our international colleagues and help intended parents sort of smoothen out their journeys so that they don't have to necessarily come to the United States for their sperm freeze or even embryo creation. So we have collaborators now in all parts of Australia, and in those particular labs and clinics, we can freeze sperm and transport it to the United States. We can freeze gametes, we can freeze eggs, we can cryopreserve embryos. Of course, there are rules and regulations, very strict rules and regulations in regards to all of this, and this is something that we abide by in collaboration with our colleagues in Australia. So that has allowed many intended parents not to stall their journeys. You know, for many intended parents, they can't wait because there, as you know, there is a decline in the quality and the quantity of eggs in the ovaries as time progresses. So the longer they wait, the less chance they're going to be able to have good fertility, good quality eggs. And for intended fathers, again, we have the options of freezing sperm and allowing them to continue on their journey to building their families. In regards to the actual virus itself, whilst there was some initial sort of doubts as to how it affected fertility, how it affected a pregnancy, all of the studies that have been done, and there have been many studies published around the world, in the US and around the world, have been very, very reassuring in terms of fertility and pregnancy. The first several studies that were published showed that there was no evidence of vertical transmission of the virus to the fetus, which was, again, great news. The virus doesn't seem to have any effect on eggs, on sperm, which is great in terms of the IVF process. And also, there was a great study that was published at Columbia University that showed that women who were pregnant and who tested positive for the virus, the majority of them, about 88% of them, either had very mild symptoms or were asymptomatic without any symptoms at all. So again, good news, even if a patient is not vaccinated and whilst they're pregnant, the overwhelming majority of pregnant patients have a very sort of a limited course of the infection in terms of symptoms. Now, it's certainly possible that if those symptoms were severe, that could increase the risk of miscarriage in the first trimester, increase the risk of preterm delivery in the third trimester. But I do think now one of the most exciting phases of human history has been the development of the vaccines in such a rapid pace. There are now currently 5 very effective vaccines that have been approved in the US, and we have one more, AstraZeneca, that will be approved probably within the next several weeks. So these particular vaccines have gone through phase 1, 2, and 3 trials, meaning that they've looked at their efficacy, their safety. And one of the recent studies, for example, that actually Rich and I were sharing in regards to the efficacy of the vaccine was in pregnant women. Pregnant women who were vaccinated, or even women who were breastfeeding who were vaccinated, generated high levels of antibodies for their own protection. Their side effects from the vaccine were no different than the non-pregnant population. And then the other good news was that there was a transplacental transfer of protective antibodies to the newborn. So for a duration unknown at this particular point, the newborns will also be protected because they'll have these protective antibodies that have been transferred via the placenta. So really, thus far, the studies on the vaccine have been very reassuring in terms of efficacy. For example, the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines are 100% effective in the studies against hospitalization and death. And that's really what we want, is we want to make sure that we reduce this virus potentially just to a similar virulence to a cold or the flu. The other factor is that patients often ask us, well, when is the best time to be vaccinated? And I think that as soon as you can become vaccinated, we want you to be vaccinated. It's going to protect you, and it's going to protect the ones around you. The only time that we are concerned about the vaccination is at the time of the embryo transfer, about 10 days before, 10 days afterwards, because if you do have side effects in regards to fever, then that could potentially affect the ability of the embryo to implant. Embryos are sensitive to fluctuations in temperature. But outside of those particular parameters, certainly we encourage patients to be vaccinated. And also, it's not just, this is not our recommendation. The American Society of Reproductive Medicine, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the WHO, in fact, in particular, Kate O'Brien, who's the head of the immunization department and vaccination department of the World Health Organization, and the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, all recommend offering the vaccine to pregnant patients as well. So whilst the choice to take the vaccine is certainly a personal one, it is something that's very highly recommended by many societies, medical societies, and us, and I think it's really the only way to vanquish the virus.
Thank you. I think one of the other truly important topics is around cost and minimizing cost. As we know, this is an expensive process. And maximizing success rates. And I know that we speak about this a lot. How do we minimize the cost and maximize success to make this as doable as possible? Do you want to touch on some of those topics?
Do you want me to touch on costs? Absolutely. So really, I think that each particular case is sort of individualized. If it's less costly for you to be able to do your IVF cycle, for example, in your hometown, you know, we have colleagues again across Australia who we collaborate with, and you can undergo the IVF cycle, create your embryos, and then potentially transport the embryos to us. But really, what we want to make sure is that we individualize your care. We look at it specifically your situation in regards to not only where you are, where you live, but what are the goals that we want to set, and really having a great team surrounding you in regards to attorneys, in regards to your clinic, in regards to your agency. We want to make sure that you have a terrific team that's going to guide you and support you throughout the whole process.
Yeah, and I think Stephen Page, you will be talking a little bit. I don't know why I used your full name then, but I just did. Stephen, you're going to be talking a little bit about egg donation because we know that there are some legal implications. But I guess one of the things that we talk about a lot is if you're going down the egg donor route and you have the ability to use a clinic's egg donor, you're not going to pay an agency fee. Therefore, you can actually bring down the external professional costs. Those donors live close to the clinics. You're not going to be paying travel, hotels, all those different things. So that's another way. Just so if you are not creating embryos in the US, in Australia, and you're going to be doing it using a donor from the States, that's one way of bringing costs down, right?
Absolutely. And you know, and I did not mention that yes, I mean, we do have a terrific egg donor database of pre-screened egg donors. All the screening has been performed, psychological, genetic, infectious disease testing, Every donor has to meet with a genetics counselor, Amy Vance, who's the director of Bay Area Genetics in San Francisco. So all of that testing has been done. All the health parameters have been checked for our egg donors, and we also don't have an egg donor agency fee, which really will reduce the cost for those of you who would like the help of an egg donor to create your families.
Yeah. And I think, Rich, you can touch upon this a little bit too, but there's a common misconception that because SDFC or San Diego Fertility Center is based in California, that you have to use a California-based surrogate. And that is not the case. Dr. C, do you want to touch a little bit upon how, for example, we would work with a surrogate based in Idaho or Minnesota or Florida?
Absolutely. I mean, really, the most important factor and parameter is the health of the surrogate. We want to make sure that you are working with a surrogate who's healthy, who's had previous pregnancies without any complications, who has a great supportive home structure, a good healthy home structure. Her health and the previous pregnancies that she's had, we want to make sure that they were without complications. And so that's of paramount importance, because that's going to determine the health of the pregnancy and your child. And if your surrogate lives in a different state, it doesn't matter, because we have colleagues in different states around the US, and we can perform the monitoring there for your surrogate. They send us the ultrasound images, the blood work, and the blood test results. I'm the one who's going to analyze them and then make the decision in terms of what the next steps are. So with colleagues, we can perform the monitoring, and your surrogate will only need to come to us twice, once for screening and the second time for the embryo transfer.
So not to put you on the spot, Richard or Saeed, but I'm wondering, in terms of cost, since you brought that up, with COVID, we've had to modify our protocols, and so you can screen the surrogate local to where she is, even though eventually she'll come to San Diego for the transfer, for instance. You can have genetic material shipped from Australia to San Diego instead of having the people come to Australia. How does that balance out cost-wise? Is it mostly a wash, more or less, or because it's expensive to ship, but you can still save by not having all those travel expenses?
Yeah. So from the shipping perspective, because in effect, what a client is going to do is they're going to go to a clinic in Australia to do the work, right? They're going to have to pay out of pocket. They're going to have to pay that clinic. As a clinic, SDFC actually we've reduced our fee a little bit to help compensate for that. Shipping can be expensive if you're doing it individually. If you're doing it in a bulk shipment, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen these, but I've got props. I love props. This is what sperm is shipped in, right? So this is a frozen sperm. Well, this isn't. It's empty. That would be weird. This is sperm gets put into. You put into that. I know. Sorry, it's late. And then that goes in here, and that's then shipped, right? So you can fit a number of these into a tank, and certain shipping companies will put 4, 5, 6 of these into a tank, and that brings down the overall cost. So what I'm finding is that actually in certain instances, it's actually cheaper to do everything at home than it would be to fly to the States, take a week out of your busy schedule. It ends up being more cost effective. Yeah. But actually,
and just to kick in with that, some of the cost, if it's done in Australia, will be met by the Australian government. And this depends on the doctor you go to.
Yeah.
And it can't be for surrogacy, because there are regulations concerning that. But if you are smart about the process, then you should be able to save money and be able to attain Medicare to creating either the sperm, freezing the sperm, or creating embryos in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the downside is, of course, you don't get the experience. You don't get to meet the doctor in person. You don't get to meet the team. I've had clients, the first time they're meeting their surrogates is when she's giving birth, and that it takes away some of the magic of the whole process. And it's been definitely it's been brutal for certain people. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for some of our intended parents, we have been able to write support letters, to be able to obtain visas for them to be able to come here, especially for those who we feel that for us to be able to do the IVF cycle and embryo creation in our lab is really would enhance their chances of a successful pregnancy and delivery. We really have done everything possible with the help of colleagues, Rich, and other colleagues in the United States, to be able to really formulate letters of urgency so that we can get patients here. Now, of course, upon their return back to Australia, they would have quarantine requirements that have to be met. But if you abide by all the regulations, we still are able to get intended parents over to us here for their IVF cycles.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good natural segue into Rich. Two topics that we've kind of just brought up there. One is national interest exemption. How does one travel from a legal perspective into the United States at this moment in time? And two, surrogacy is regulated on a state-by-state basis. You've mentioned earlier that you can work US-wide. Can you touch a little bit on that and what the different regulations, how it could be affected, how I as an intended parent could be affected if my surrogate is in Idaho versus in California, and how would that work?
Sure. So during the pandemic, last year, of course, there were a number of presidential proclamations that were banning entry into the US from certain parts of the world. Australia was never on any of those lists as far as the US was concerned. So if intended parents are coming to the US, they're perfectly free to enter the US. You still need, of course, valid travel documents, and you still have to deal with exiting Australia. There may be some restrictions on exiting and flying out, but as far as getting into the US from Australia, there really shouldn't be any COVID-related bans, other than, of course, any international traveler coming to the US as of January 26th, I think, should be getting a COVID test, and they should have a negative COVID test result within 72 hours of their departure to the US. So that's the only real thing for Australian intended parents to be worried about. Should there be some
14 days self-isolation, Rich, on arrival?
Yes, you always have to quarantine upon arrival. Yeah. So that's fairly straightforward. I mean, should there be an expansion of any of the travel bans, and if it ever did apply to Australia, there are usually exceptions to these travel bans for humanitarian purposes. If someone is a US citizen living in Australia, they're allowed to travel to the US. If they're the parent or guardian of a US citizen child, they're allowed to travel. And there's also the national interest exception, which we've been using to get people approved from all parts of the world that were subject to the travel bans. And the argument basically goes, look, there's a national interest to the US for these parents to be allowed here because they need to be here for the birth of their child at a minimum, so they can make medical decisions for the child, take the child from the hospital, care for the child, etc., and not place that burden on the healthcare resources here in the US. So that aside, for now, there really are no major issues for Australians traveling to the US. Now, in terms of your other question about the various states here and how surrogacy law is basically addressed in the US, it is state by state. It is not federal law here. So each state develops its own rules and regulations about how surrogacy can or cannot be practiced and who can or cannot be declared a legal parent through surrogacy. In surrogacy, our main objective is to make sure that the intended parents become the legal parents. We typically go to court to get a court order that declares the surrogate to be not a parent and to declare the intended parents as the only legal parents, and that their names would go on the birth certificate. And how we do that will vary a little bit from state to state, although generally the documentation is somewhat similar, even though in some states we might have 38 documents, in other states we have 2. The general approach is to explain to the court that it is a fully agreed petition that we're putting in front of the court, that all parties agree on the facts of the case and the outcome, which is a court order declaring intended parents as the legal parents. The timing can vary a little bit from state to state, but in general, the states break down into 2 main categories: whether we go to court pre-birth during the pregnancy and get a pre-birth court order, or we go to court post-birth and get a court order after the baby has been born. Most states in the US are pre-birth, and even in the pre-birth states, you have the option of filing your case post-birth if for any reason you needed to do so. So that's generally how the states break down. But in all cases, we usually see that it takes about 2 weeks, whether it's a post-birth order or not, to get the birth certificate prepared correctly with the intended parents' names listed. And that's important because the parents will need the birth certificate to then complete a US passport application for the child so that the child has a valid travel document to travel home on.
Brilliant. And that I think that's really important. I think, can you touch upon the ability potentially to export a pre-birth order from California out?
Absolutely. So in most of the states, we basically would file the court case in the state where the surrogate is giving birth. But there are some exceptions to this rule. And one of the exceptions is in California, which has a statute indicating that the courts in California have what we call personal and subject matter jurisdiction to enter a court order of parental rights if the medical procedures occurred in California. And so you can get a California court order even in a place, in a case where a surrogate was giving birth in Texas or Missouri or Wisconsin or Georgia or Oregon. Many, many states will accept an out-of-state court order from the state of California as long as California has subject matter and personal jurisdiction. So in those cases, we can get a pre-birth order in California and have that court order honored in the birth state. And we always make sure that we're talking to the hospital and the state vital records office where the birth certificate will be entered and making sure that they're on board with that plan before we just go forward and assume that a California pre-birth order will work. So we always double check. We know by custom and practice and precedent where this will work, but we always double check before we begin that case. But that works in many, many cases. And in some places that can help you get through or avoid a more complicated or expensive or timely court process. I'll use Wisconsin as an example. It's generally a place where we go to court after birth where all parties have to appear for a hearing. But Wisconsin will accept a pre-birth order from California where no one has to appear, where we just do everything on paper and we get it done weeks and weeks before the birth.
Okay, cool. There are questions coming through, by the way, so we will get to those questions. Please don't panic, I will get to them. During COVID, have you noticed that any of the legal contracts with surrogates or egg donors have been updated to include things like vaccinations or just any changes? Can you maybe touch on that?
Of course, yeah. So there's several ways in which COVID has affected the rest of the legal process, and it starts really at the beginning, even before you get to contracts. Now, in assisted reproduction in the US, you will need a contract with your donor and with your surrogate. The contracts can contain a variety of different, conduct restrictions, including following medical orders, doctor's orders at all times. And that includes following doctor's orders regarding COVID and COVID restrictions and guidelines to prevent exposure and risking infection. So we'll include paragraphs in the contracts to indicate that the surrogate or donor are aware that there's a pandemic. I don't know who isn't, but that they also agree to follow doctor's orders in regard to avoiding exposure risks. But it's important, even at the very beginning, especially with a surrogate, that we start having that conversation about vaccines early on, because that can be an important piece of the matching process, because it's important that an intended parent that is pro-vaccine be matched with a surrogate who is pro-vaccine. I mean, maybe in a few months' time, we won't have as much of this conversation because most people will have been vaccinated, hopefully. But now we're in that process where it's important to ask that question up front so that you're matched appropriately. We don't want to end up in a situation where parents want the surrogate to get the vaccine and the surrogate refuses, or vice versa. So that's an important piece to consider up front. Now, also be aware that with COVID, sometimes if there is some travel included for the surrogate or donor traveling to the clinic for the cycle and the procedures, if there are quarantine requirements as well, that could extend the surrogate or egg donor's trip, which might also mean more expenses. Perhaps she's missing time from work and there's more travel expenses. That's just something to think about in advance. One other thing I should mention about COVID in terms of our work is we also have to be mindful that if there are any travel restrictions, the parents need to be thinking about who might be a temporary backup guardian to come and help with the child or collect the child from the hospital if the parents are in some way restricted in their travel here. And also be mindful of the fact that hospitals here are certainly concerned about public health risks and exposures, and there may be limitations on who can be allowed into the hospital. At the height of the pandemic, there were times when the hospitals were only allowing the surrogate for the birth. No one else, not even her support person, certainly not intended parents. Now that's changed a lot over time, and we've gone up and down, as everybody knows. So right now we're on a nice downslide, and it's getting easier, but there could be a time when we go back in that direction, and perhaps they limit who can be in the hospital. So just be mindful to think about that and be prepared for that up front.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, I mean, we've touched upon egg donors, surrogates. Stephen, you know, the laws in Australia around compensation are pretty well known. Can you give us a little bit more of a background on what the law is? Has it ever been enforced? How things are actually working versus theory versus reality, and especially with regards compensated egg donors and things like that?
Sure. Well, I'll actually challenge you on something, Richard. It's well known to us that we can't pay egg donors or surrogates other than their reasonable expenses or their reasonable costs, or however they might be set out in a law. But for many intended parents, they don't know that. And it's quite extraordinary to talk to intended parents who are referred to me at the end of the journey to discover that accidentally they seem to have committed a series of offences, and at which point you hear the death gurgle, and it's one of those moments that they realise that if they're really unlucky, then they could kiss their career goodbye. The reality is that no one has been prosecuted for offences relating to egg donor. No one has been prosecuted for commercial surrogacy offences overseas, but the offences are there, and it's certainly wise to make sure that there's compliance, and it can be complied with. So if we talk about egg donors, there are laws in Australia dealing with human tissue, so you can't buy human tissue, and that applies to egg, sperm and embryo donors, potential up to 6-month term of imprisonment. They're under state and ACT laws, Northern Territory laws as well. And then there are commercial egg donor laws, so that we can't pay anything other than the reasonable expenses of an egg, sperm or embryo donor, and that's up to 15 years jail time. And the problem about those laws, both sets of laws, is that although on face value they only apply within Australia, in 6 of our 8 jurisdictions there are what are known as long arm laws, and I don't want to frighten the 3 of you or anyone else watching, but they reach out like this, like a long arm. So they extend the jurisdiction out from that state overseas. So certainly it's possible to do egg donation in the United States from Australia, but care must be taken so that there isn't an accidental breaching of those laws. And then we have the problems with our surrogacy laws. We have 8 sets of laws, so I should say 7 sets of laws, because the Northern Territory hasn't yet got laws. I'm on part of a working group for the Northern Territory government, so the Northern Territory will have surrogacy laws in place, and I expect that they will be similar to the laws that we see interstate, making it an offence to pay a surrogate other than for her expenses. And in 3 of our jurisdictions, and they are Queensland, New South Wales and the ACT, it's a specific criminal offence to go overseas for commercial surrogacy. In 2 of our states, South Australia and Western Australia, it could be, because there are long arm laws there. So care must be taken in those states. So Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, South Australia and Western Australia, so that there isn't an accidental breaching of the law. It's assumed by many Australians that going to the United States must be commercial surrogacy. Well, Family Court judge said that right 5 years ago when he said to the lawyer concerned, look, in effect, I don't understand what you're saying to me that this is commercial surrogacy. It's not. And he ruled that the surrogacy journey concern was not commercial surrogacy either under the Queensland or New South Wales Surrogacy Acts. So you can't make that assumption. And so care needs to be taken in going overseas. It's certainly still doable going to the US with care.
Okay, and I guess a question that I've always thought, and this is probably between Rich and Stephen, in an egg donor contract, are you paying her for tissue, or are you paying her for pain and suffering, and how does that work? And then how does that then translate into Australia?
It's really important to understand that you are not paying for eggs when you pay an egg donor for her time, for her efforts, for all the pain and suffering and inconvenience, the medications, all the appointments. You don't buy and sell eggs. You are paying her for her time. And if you get one egg out of the cycle, you're paying the same as if you got 50 or 100. So you're not paying for the genetic material. And if you got nothing, and that does sometimes happen, it's really, really rare, especially with good doctors like Dr. Daneshmand. But even if nothing came out, you would still pay the fee because of everything she's been through. That's really, really important. We make it very clear. We specifically say in the contract, we are not paying for genetic material.
Yeah.
Interesting. And that's something I've always wanted to be clarified. So I've got a couple of questions that have come through. One of them is, we want to know whether there are any FDA testing requirements when sending embryos from Australia to America. The answer is yes. Depending upon, the FDA is a very strange beast, and the bane of my existence, because I'm basically running all of the shipping. The way that the FDA looks at things is if you've created embryos to use in yourself, and then they've been sitting there for a year, and then all of a sudden that hasn't worked, and you then decide to move into a surrogacy arrangement, the FDA allow you to do something called retrospective FDA testing. And what that means is you're going to do a blood and a urine test to make sure you have no sexually transmitted diseases. And you also do a physical exam, which has to be signed and stamped by a doctor. If that's done, if those two things are done, and the blood and urine tests come back negative for the list of infectious diseases, those embryos can then be used to go forward. If you haven't created your embryos yet, and you have decided to go forward with surrogacy, then you need to do that testing before you even create the embryos. Because your intention is to use a surrogate, therefore the FDA will not give you retrospective. So I hope that answers your question.
And can I add a follow-up question then?
Sure.
What if you created embryos in Australia with the intention of using them with a surrogate? An altruistic, uncompensated, or wherever, but Australia, since we're talking to Australians today. And it doesn't work, or you don't find a surrogate, and then you want to use them in the US.
Retrospective FDA testing.
You can, yeah.
If you want, if you're wanting to do it with a surrogate in the States, you have to do the FDA testing. Yeah. So if you email me and say, we're thinking of using a surrogate and we're going to make embryos, and then you make embryos and you haven't done your FDA testing, I'm like, why did you email me and not listen to what I told you to do?
I was just going to jump in, Rich and Richard, with that and say, well, we're talking about Australians going to the US for surrogacy. But let's look at some numbers. The very issue that you've raised, Rich, is, well, we're going to create some embryos today and hopefully we'll find a surrogate, but lo and behold, we can't find someone. This is normal, everyday experience for Aussies. The numbers really tell the story. The most recent year, which is a couple of years out of date, the number of children born through surrogacy in Australia and New Zealand IVF clinics was 86. So if we take New Zealand out of that for the sake of argument, we'll say maybe that's 75, 80, thereabouts. In the 2019-2020 financial year, so that's from 1 July to 30 June, there were 275 children born to Australian intended parents overseas, and 120 of those were in the US. So two things that flow from that. For every child born in Australia through surrogacy, there are about 3 born somewhere else, and there are more Australian children born through surrogacy in the United States than there are in Australia itself. That says a lot. And what it says is that we don't have enough surrogates. And you can certainly ask family and friends, you can certainly go on Facebook groups and so on and ask and make sure that you don't breach the advertising rules, because there are laws in each state about doing that. But when it comes down to tin tax, what we do know is that there are surrogates available in the US, and that has certainly continued throughout the pandemic. I've certainly not seen, what I'm asked a lot of the time is, well, in the pandemic, doesn't everything stop? And shouldn't we wait till the pandemic's over? That's what I get asked, shouldn't we wait? And I said, why? You want to be older at that point? Do you want to have a child now, or do you want to have a child in, however many years? It's still doable. I just want to take up something that Rich was saying before about travel. Travel has certainly made the process of the restrictions of the pandemic for surrogacy slower, a little bit more costly, but I think mainly slower. The several issues are in going over and coming back. What you would do from Australia before would be book travel online, get ESTA, land in the US, say at about 36 weeks if your child is being born not being induced or by C-section, and then at the end of the process get your birth certificate, you get your court order, you get your birth certificate, you get your US passport for the child. This is how Australians invariably did it at the time, and the Australian Electronic Travel Authority can fly home, and then once home apply for citizenship and get citizenship. What's happened with the pandemic is, number one, get a travel agent to do the booking, because the number of flights are really restrictive and costs have gone up. And there's been a lot of media reports in Australia about Australians getting stuck overseas. I've not seen that. In the last year of the pandemic, Australian intended parents have been going over, coming back. I've not seen that problem. The second thing is, to get out of Australia, you need Australian government approval. Now, a year ago, when the restrictions came in, it was chaotic. We just had a mess. And I had clients who would get approval in 3 days or 3 weeks or somewhere in between, when the government was saying, apply at least 14 hours before you go to fly. So the assumption was we're going to get approval straight away. What I can say is that now approval must be applied for no greater than 3 months before you fly. You must say the port that you're leaving from, say Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, wherever it may be. So you can change the flights, but you can't change the port for the approval. And it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to do. And typically we have a list of documents. We say to clients, these are the things that need to be supplied, and that'll include a letter from someone like Rich or a letter from someone like Dr. Daneshmand to assist the process. And coming home, there were issues about getting US passports. There were issues in some places about how quickly court orders or birth certificates have been obtained. And as Rich was saying before, we've had this happen. But in California, and Rich will correct me if I'm wrong, there's not been any great delay in getting court orders or birth certificates issued.
No, across the country, we've been seeing that birth certificates and court orders are still being issued in a very timely manner. It's the US passport process that's still a little bit delayed, as the passport offices for the State Department have not resumed full staffing yet in most places. In some places they have. So getting your passport appointment is harder, and sometimes it takes a little longer. That's changing quickly right now. We've seen a number of passport offices come back online fully just recently, and the times for processing passports are going down. So, you know, at the height of the pandemic, it was 16 weeks. Now we're back to, you know, and if you're lucky, you get an appointment right away. You can get it within a few days, and in some places a week or two, as many as 4 weeks in some of the slower places. So it's coming down rapidly right now.
Well, a year ago when Scott Morrison said, we're not going to have any tourists in Australia, he was right. I think the last figures I saw was instead of 100% tourists, as we'd seen before, we got down to 0.1% tourists. And how did the Australian government do that? It said, we're getting rid of or suspending electronic travel authorities. They've just gone. So the process before of getting a passport and then getting an electronic travel authority, which was pretty seamless, that's out the window. What Australians now have to do, they can still get the US passport if they want. Obviously, there are advantages for their child in having that. The child will still be a US citizen by having been born in the United States. But to get the child back to Australia, the Department of Home Affairs is now saying loud and clear, you must apply for Australian citizenship. Now, no one did that before because it was like this. You'd start here and you'd finish there. You had no control of when you finished, but typically it was 2 to 4 months. And in that time, you couldn't apply for an electronic travel authority, or I should say you could apply, it wouldn't be granted. So you'd just be waiting, and you'd be waiting in the world's longest queue, and you'd still be waiting. And so Australians just didn't do that. They'd get the electronic travel authority. Now, to full credit to the Department of Home Affairs, they're doing it quickly. They will approve Australian citizenship in 1 to 5 business days. And so I've had clients who've done it themselves. I've had clients who've done it through a migration agent. I'd certainly recommend going through an experienced migration agent. But I certainly have had clients do it themselves, and 1 to 5 business days. So if you get all your paperwork right within a week or thereabouts, you should get approval. So I've not seen any great delay in coming home.
And thank you. You've literally just answered 3 of the questions.
Well, I was going to say the next, I should say, is coming back. You will be subjected to 2 weeks of state quarantine, and if you live in Sydney, you will have the joy of it being in Sydney. But if you happen to live somewhere else but land in Sydney, it'll depend on what the state authorities have agreed upon. Sometimes I've had clients who've landed in Sydney and gone home to Perth or Adelaide or Brisbane. And again, it depends on, if I do this that Rich was doing before, it'll depend on what the current arrangements are. It might be that you have to do your quarantine in Sydney and then you're allowed to fly on. At the worst, we've had people who've landed in Sydney, spent 2 weeks there, and had the misfortune of another 2 weeks in going to Queensland and being stuck for 4 weeks. So there's got to be some planning done for that. That will cost you. We're looking typically at about $3,000 or $4,000. You don't, unlike a typical hotel, you don't get that in advance with a credit card. They give you a bill after the date, and you're expected to pay it within a month. It can be exemption, and we've seen movie stars get exemptions. They are incredibly expensive to obtain, and unless you've got absolute buckets of money, it's unlikely that you'll get the exemption. However, if you have twins, I've certainly seen a case where intended parents with twins or parents with twins have been given an exemption for obvious reasons. So that can be a case where exemptions are granted. I recommend parents apply for exemptions, and the reason seems counterintuitive, because you'll get knocked back. Now, Rich will tell you, well, why would a lawyer would never recommend applying for something to get knocked back, because what's the point in doing it? But the reason for doing it is it's, hello, we're here. And so even if you get the exemption refused, chances are, because you've drawn attention to yourselves and you've got a newborn, you might get a room that actually has a porch or a veranda, so you can sit outside and your child can scream to their heart's content inside, or you can go outside and, dare I say, have a drink, or if you're so inclined, have a smoke. So these are ways for parents to not feel as though they're in the pressure cooker at all times in that 2 weeks.
And I would say along those same lines, Stephen, for any Australians that are nationals of other countries, and they might need a visa to travel to the US because of their citizenship, we've helped people obtain their visa, and you'll apply and immediately get rejected. But then you explain the situation, you're on their radar now, then they get you back on the list, and then you get an appointment, we get it expedited, and they get the visa, and then you're able to travel. So looks like we may have lost
I think
Stephen.
we've just lost Stephen. I think he got
Sure,
bored.
he'll get back in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the other questions, if we create an embryo in Australia for use in America, can the testing be done in Australia? The answer to that question is yes, but the testing itself, so what would happen is the blood and the urine testing would be done, it would be drawn in Australia into a pack, so it'd be put into plastic vials, and those would be sent from Australia to the United States for testing on US soil. So
I didn't get that.
So Siri's talking to me.
You weren't clear enough, Richard. You're not clear.
I'm not clear enough.
No, you were very
I
clear.
didn't get that.
So yeah, so that can be done. It normally takes 3 to 4 days for the FedEx pack to arrive to the company in the States, and then another 3 or 4 days to get the results. Once you've got the results and you've been approved, then your sperm can be shipped. Now, one of the things that we recommend is we call it pre-cycle testing, which is before you even do the sperm freezing and the blood. So the blood and the urine has to be done within 7 days of the sperm freeze. Before you even do that, you do that testing in advance so that we can tell that you are not carrying any active infection. Because if you are, and you've done that blood testing, we can't then use that frozen sperm. So do it in advance, make sure that you know that you were clean, so that when you then do your sperm freeze and the FDA bloods, we know that you're going to be fine. The only thing I will say is between the time you do the pre-cycle testing and the time that you do the FDA testing, don't do anything that could potentially change your sexually transmitted disease status. No judgment, just don't do anything.
Can I say something about this panel just for a sec? And that is, this panel just illustrates the issue with surrogacy, because surrogacy, to state the obvious, is the most complex way of making a baby. And international surrogacy is the most complex form of surrogacy. And international surrogacy in the pandemic era, it just is that little bit more complex as well. It is so much easier to have intended parents get the legal advice right at the beginning from both ends, so that we can plan to ensure that there isn't a drama with going over, coming back. There isn't a drama with how we actually can become parents in a way that doesn't blow the bank, and how we can actually make sure we comply with the laws, rather than, oh my God, we've spent far too much money and we're still stuck in the process. And how did we end up here? And please help us. Oh, and by the way, we've just discovered that we've committed a series of offences. So taking care right at the beginning will really save that. And I'll just say the obvious, prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely. Another question that I received that I think we can touch upon briefly is, how do we go about choosing a surrogacy agency? And that's a great question, because actually everybody on this panel can help you with that. We work with many different agencies, big, small, from East Coast to the West Coast, the middle of the United States. That in itself is probably an hour-long topic. And I think one that we can probably touch on. I mean, Rich, Dr. D, Steve, do you want to just give maybe your one top tip or a top tip on choosing a surrogacy agency? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I mean, I always, I have a list of preferred agencies. It's based on reputation, experience, and feedback I've received from parents over the last, 20 plus years. They have to be an agency that's really experienced so they can guide you and support you. They have to be reactive, in constant communication, available, element of warmth. It's just sort of that mirrors what we do. It's, if you look at Stephen and we look at Rich, they are always available. I mean, I can text them, I can WhatsApp them, I can always discuss this with them. And I do, and we do. We text each other, and because it's a collaborative effort to support intended parents. We want to collaborate together. We want to learn from one another. And if those are some of the criteria that at least I adhere to when recommending surrogacy agencies.
Rich?
Yeah, I would say something similar, and understand that there are several hundred agencies in the US. And as an intended parent, you are in a slightly vulnerable position. You need help, and you'll go online. You can get lost immediately by looking at agencies, and they all have beautiful pictures of cute little babies, and they all look the same online, but they're not. So I think getting qualified referrals from other professionals in this space will help you narrow down the field a little bit to those, again, as Dr. Daneshmand said, those that have the experience, those that are professional, those that get good feedback consistently from clients, and that will help you sort of narrow your research. Do your due diligence. Do not fall victim to the cutest website on the internet, interview at least more than one. You've got to have at least two. You can't make an informed choice unless you've at least interviewed two.
Sure, it's very true.
I endorse what Dr. Danishmand and Rich have said. Absolutely. Don't rely on Facebook. Don't just go to the websites and look at the cute pictures of babies and think that what you're getting is the right choice. There is virtually no regulation of surrogacy agencies in the US, just like there is anywhere else in the world. If you go to your local supermarket or corner store and buy that bottle of milk, there's a lot more regulation about that bottle of milk to make sure that you're not poisoned. And yet that bottle of milk will cost you, what, a couple of dollars, $2 or $3. Here you're going to be spending a lot more money. You've just got to make sure that you do it right. Going to the professionals who are in the field, who know what they're doing and can give you those recommendations, you're much more likely to go to the right place.
If any of you have any questions that you feel that you couldn't ask now, please email me. I will introduce you to Stephen, to Rich, Dr. D, and we can help you with any of those questions. And lastly, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated. Great information as always. And thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Have a
Good
great
sleep,
weekend.
Richard. Good night.
Bye.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Bye.